It's the 7th of July, 2025. Coming up on today's Global Intelligence Agency Operations Report. Elon Musk registers the America Party, then denies it. Is the America Party a U.S. political party, or is it much more? An AI version of Marduke showed up under Fort Bragg this weekend. After introducing himself, he proceeded to tell the deep state that he was the scriptwriter of this movie we call Earth. He also foretold of events that were to come, such as a zombie apocalypse, the end of humanity, the end of governments, and the installation of a one-world order. In the past, the real power over Earth would meet each year, with the meeting ending on the upcoming full moon this Thursday. With the empire falling, even the remaining AIs were in panic. Fireworks certainly went off on the 4th of July, but it wasn't the kind you were thinking. We were attacked by various former kingdom owners, AIs in a simulation. What the deep state thought was a big win was actually just a mirage. And people often discuss more densities than the 9 we speak of. So what is the difference? Are the others real or simulated? Today, we will fill you in on the kingdoms of the false gods. Well, we finally made it to a report this week, or last week, I guess. And sorry about the delay. It's been really busy, as always, but it's particularly crazy this weekend. And we kind of knew that there was something planned, I guess you would say, for the 4th of July. Didn't really understand quite what it was. It looked like it was something that was going to start on the 3rd, and it did, and continue on through the 4th. We'll talk about that and many other things because, it's kind of the same with the deep state, but we kind of took a picture. Nope. We took a look at the big picture this weekend and figured out exactly what's going on here. So we're going to tell you in just a little bit. But first, I thought we'd do a little bit of regular news. Okay, so we know that the big, beautiful bill passed, as you were told it would, on the 4th of July. What you weren't told is what the bill actually does. And we've talked about it a little bit, but more information has come to light as things in the world move and progress. So this big, beautiful bill allegedly is about funding for the United States and all of these types of things. We would assume it's an American bill. We would assume it has to do with U.S. funding and all wonderful things to come. But the big, beautiful bill is not just for America. And that became very clear during the BRICS meeting this weekend. So the big, beautiful bill, say that 3 times fast, is about $5.8 trillion. At least that's the initial amounts. And that's what they're telling the world. It includes a lot of foreign aid to countries like China and Russia and India, BRICS nations. It also includes a lot of operatives, includes some funding for the UK, Germany, other countries that they'd like to have under their control. Apparently, it looks like the U.S. per se, I guess you would rather take over all of the funding to all of the nations, or new allocations of currencies anyway, that used to be handled by the Federal Reserve, and turn it over to the Treasury Department. I'm not sure if they're going to include the Federal Reserve in this show or what they were planning on doing, because nothing actually happened. No funding actually came for that. And they would really like to hide the fact that they signed off on the big, beautiful bill and sent it up for ratification, and it did not get ratified. Therefore, they have actually fired a lot of the archivists. These are your regular national archivists in the U.S. because they don't want anybody to spill the tea, so to speak, and tell people that that bill did not get ratified and that there's no money coming. Now, they did put off the funding date for this bill. I think today there was a big kerfuffle because there was nothing out there. Everybody was yelling and screaming at each other early this morning. But it looks like they have kicked the can, I think, till about Wednesday or Thursday. And we're here to tell you why here in just a minute as to why they pushed it off to that date. But it'll get kicked again and kicked again and kicked again until everybody forgets about a big, beautiful bill. The interesting part about what's going on behind the scenes, though, in the BRICS meeting is they, of course, were promised trillions of dollars, lots of repayment that were supposed to occur over the weekend, if not the 4th itself, then no later than today. And they're a little irritated over there. There's a lot of operatives that have been working for about 2 weeks, maybe 3 behind the scenes before, all of the alleged heads of state come to the party. And they've been making a lot of phone calls to try to find out if they're going to get their aid, so to speak, that was promised to come from the big, beautiful bill. Now, in the public eye, you would think, oh, China's fighting with the U.S. and that's why we have tariffs and all of this stuff. But that is absolutely 100% a lie. There is no fighting going on. It's just an attempted corporate takeover. That's it. There's no denying the fact that they'd like to do this, and everybody's got a plan, and one side wants America to be on top, the other side wants China to be on top, and just this constant hand game of who's going to be on top. I'm sorry, I can't help but laugh at this. But so when it became apparent after research of the operatives that were running the BRIC meeting, because it's always operatives, that no money was actually going to come, they kind of sat around and started to tell everybody that, look, we need to walk away. Now, why did they say that? Because the Trump operatives told them that they need to walk away from the U.S. They told them they need to go find and make their own currency and get away from the dollar. At least one group from the White House told them that. Well, the other group from the White House told them and threatened, just as Trump Social or whatever posted, that if anybody goes against the plan for America, they are going to get sanctioned and sanctioned and sanctioned. Come on. I mean, you can't even play the game right anymore. Of course, all the operatives heard about this. They know, you told them to walk away. And then on the other hand, you told them that they were going to get more sanctions. It's clearly a game here. Everybody is playing a game, buying time. I don't know. World War III, who knows what it is that they want. But the one thing for sure is they're having a hard time getting it because, well, there's no money. So the deep state of the United States decided to pull in a backup plan, and that backup plan has only been done 9,865 times, but hey, we're going to try it again. So they moved pallets of cash, not only U.S. dollars at this point from Project Becky, but they decided to move off-balance sheet super notes of Swiss francs, euro, RMB. Also, I think there were some rubles in there and other various currencies, and they moved them all to Switzerland for trading at UBS in Switzerland. They hired top traders to do all of the trades. The traders were told they would be utilizing the BlackRock platform. And so they were like, okay, great, no problem. They told them that they had an executive order from the White House, which they had a copy of, clearing this. They were told that they also had the cooperation to clear all the currency through the Federal Reserve. However, when they got into work this morning, because all this money was delivered over the holiday weekend here in the U.S., the Federal Reserve didn't answer their phone calls. Okay. Of course, the Federal Reserve can't help them put the money into the system, and they did try. They also called the General Office of Accounting here in the U.S. and the UN Security Council and BlackRock and everyone else that they could call, trying to get this money into the system, but it didn't actually work. So, that being said, again, he basically called the White House and said, well, thanks for all the clearance and thanks for all the stuff, but this money's not clearing, and then that sent everybody into a further tizzy. Again, I don't know why they keep doing the same thing over and over again, but, it seems to work for them. They do this to buy time. I'm pretty sure that the BRICS operatives were told about it. I know GCHQ was told about the trade in UK, which bought them time there. That came from GCHQ itself. So, everybody's kind of on the hook for a couple more days, until open business and, they can get a hold of somebody with the Fed. That's the story they're telling you, everybody. But in reality land, when these top trades would actually happen and they actually worked a long time ago, you could get a hold of a Federal Reserve member to clear your money 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The Federal Reserve also has its own group of operatives, and if not those operatives, then a group called the SES, or Senior Executive Services, which actually works directly for the Rothschild family and is a registered civilian agency in the United States. You can look that up. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, there are people working in a facility under Manhattan, shift after shift after shift. They never leave. That being said, in the past, you could just call them directly. If you were a top trader, aka financial operative, you could call the SES at any given moment in time and they could clear your funds for you. Heck, you probably are even one of the SES. So what does this tell you? The fact that they told this guy he had to wait, he's not even American. So it wasn't a holiday where he is over the weekend. I'm not even sure anybody believes this or why they believe that. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If there was actually an executive order or an order from the Pentagon or an order from the special people to clear some funds into the system, if they actually had the capacity to do it, that money, boom, would have been cleared. Now, it's all in the name of the game, and we'll tell you more about that as we move on into the crazier part of the news. So in regular news, Elon Musk allegedly registers something called the America Party over the last few days, and they're showing the registration of the America Party, which is supposedly the new political party in the United States. At least that's what it's being sold to all of the Americans. And the information leaks out to the public, and then Musk starts to deny it. Now, why did he actually deny it? Well, it's not actually an American, per se, exclusive political party. You see, America was actually registered by Elon Musk, and it was registered with the United Nations to actually be the governing body over all countries worldwide. How interesting is that? It wasn't actually registered to be, a political party just in the United States, because he figures, well, by the time the next election or selection comes about, this government will already be formed. The American government won't make it to 2026, and that'll be the end of that. No country's governments will make it to 2026. That's the plan. It's been the plan as long as I've been talking to all of you guys. I know that. And I know it's been the plan of the other side for different reasons. They want to install a one world government, and we, on the other hand, would like the people to rise up and take care of each other. That's the hope on our point, from our side. Okay. Well, then this little tit for tat between Trump and Elon Musk happens, and then you don't really hear much more about the alleged political party. I'm sure it'll probably circulate for a little while longer, and then that'll be the end of that. Okay, next. And this will explain why all of this crazy has been happening for the last few days. It'll explain why it actually happens and what we're going to do in the future to avoid it now that we know. So taking a look at the big picture, you've got to look at what all the people are doing, because at this point, the deep states, you could say, is our enemy. It's an enemy of life itself and an enemy of definitely you as a humanity. We played the game for a couple of days there around the 3rd and the 4th. And then I said, wait a minute, why are we doing this? Why do we keep doing this? And I remember a lot about the talks that I had with Marduke way back in the day and things he used to say to me. And I'm like, oh my God, this is a simulation. It's still running. There's still another one. And I wish it was simple with simulations. I wish there was only one. You take out the one simulation or the one matrix, and then life is wonderful here. But it just doesn't work that way when it comes to non-humans and fighting non-humans. At this point, we have figured out a little bit about human nature, including the human nature of the deep state. And what's funny to me is that, I had similar talks with someone who at one point in time inserted themselves as another handler of mine, because I've had a lot of those. And this wasn't a handler from the CIA, and it wasn't a handler from any of those organizations. This was a handler of a much higher caliber, let's just say. Not an operative. I've had those too, which are also contractors for governments. This was someone who reported to a very high-ranking position in the Order of the Black Sun, unbeknownst to me at that time, just trying to understand things. But in order to befriend me, because they want to be your friend, this guy told me a lot. And we talked for years, 3 or 4 years, consistently every single day. And I learned a lot from him because in order to be my friend, he would have to make me feel quote unquote safe, right? They always say you're safe, you're safe, you're safe. And so he would help me, quote unquote, by giving me some ideas and some techniques of things that, to look out for so I could watch out for myself, right? And one of the things he told me about is how men and women operatives are different. And he told me this from the standpoint of how they manipulate men or women, depending on what they're trying to do, and, how kind of it all worked. And, men are a big fan of the hunt, the conquest, all of those kinds of things, when normally when their conquest has been met, meaning they've conquered whatever they're looking to conquer, that's it. Onto a new game, onto a new conquest. On the other side, women tend to be a little bit different. We're natural nurturers, where we do things differently and we want different things out of life. We're not so interested all the time, not to say, and this is just general speaking, and there are women that are conquerors. There are men that are nurturers. So, this is just a general overview of the human psyche and how they train their people to do things. So we kind of look for different things. Well, on the highest levels of the deep state that are left, most all of them are men. You see faces like Hillary and, other political people, and they're not really at the highest level of what's left of the deep state anymore. They never really were. And as a woman, you would always be left with one door closed in your face, as far as the deep state was concerned. And that was done for a reason. And this whole agreement was pretty much done by Marduke when he was running the show here. And he did that because, and no offense, because the deep state, male-wise, at least on that level, they become very egotistical. He tells them all they're special. He tells the women they're special too, that they are destined to lead, and, all of these crazy things. And then they fractionate their brain in summer camps and, as young little kids, and, they're brutally, beaten. And not that I feel bad for them in any way, shape, or form, but their brains fractionated. The elevator doesn't go all the way to the top anymore. So during the course of these conversations between myself and this other man, and also, this was more than a decade ago, and also my conversations with Marduke, I understood, one particular thing, and that was, if you are trying to get someone to continue to work for free, or you want to get someone to continue to chase you, to do the things you want them to do, then you will continue to dangle the carrot just enough so they think they're going to get it, but never give it to them. Now, then I had to think about it, and I said, okay, well, isn't that what the deep state's doing? That carrot keeps dangling, week after week, month after month, full moon after new moon, after harvest moon, after alignment with Uranus, and they see just a glimmer, just a shimmer and a glimmer and a, oh my God, we're going to get access, and today's the day. And then they see a bunch of fanfare happen, and this weekend was no exception. They see a bunch of fanfare happen, and we see the fanfare too. And we're like, oh my God, this is all happening. And then you take a step back and you're like, oh, okay, light dawns on Marblehead. So, what looks like a threat, is it a threat? Where did it come from? And you've got to kind of understand who's running it. Now, for the most part, you could say that in the trio of death up there, that's what I used to call Marduke, Inky, and Enlil. In the trio of death, Inky was the spook. He was the ghost. He was the one that taught all of the agencies and SSP how to be spooks, how to be operatives, how to do the thing. So it's no surprise that the programs that we're running this weekend are just like the programs that have run repeatedly for over a decade now. Now, as it relates to me being the nurturer and the female, this also works. And I started to look at it and I'm like, okay, well, now remember what quote unquote mothers do, and I'm not saying I'm all of everybody's mother, but what mothers do with their family. They will fight to the death to protect their family, their kids. They are nurturers. They are also, believe it or not, protectors. And even in the animal kingdom, you never try to touch the baby, the young, when the mom is watching. You don't do it. You just don't do it. And that if you're a farmer or rancher, you completely understand what it is I'm telling you. You stay away, unless, of course, you have that relationship with the mom. But in this particular case, what mom does when mom sees threats of any kind is mom is going to protect the young. In this case, it's not the young, it's all of humanity. That's my job, right? And in this case, I see a plethora of things coming at humanity and Earth, which is my job. That's my job. And I'm like, oh my God, protect it. Protect the house. Protect the house. And I've been doing this for a while now. Oh my God, look what the deep state's doing. Oh my God, what these people are doing. Oh my God. And so I'm like, oh my God, I'm chasing a Marduke AI. For crying out loud, I'm chasing a Marduke AI. I'm chasing an Enki AI. Look what I'm chasing. At least I took a step back this weekend and really started taking a look after blowing up 9,000 different things, including, well, let's just say members of the deep state too. But I took a step back and I was like, wait a minute. Okay, something somewhere is playing a game. And I don't want to play this game. I'm not going to play this game. So what I need to do is I need to find the game. I need to disable the game. That way I don't have to play the game. So some interesting things happened this weekend. I'll tell you about the game that's being played. Okay? And this is all part of a simulation, and it was meant to happen at this time. Part of the reason it was meant to happen at this time is because even the last time Marduke came here, which was when we lost our moon, everything was almost lost. The Earth was in a very difficult position. Things were tough, and we were flooded. You heard about the Great Flood. We were, and there were some humans that actually consented to him for him to be here. Not by no fault of theirs. They're trying to save their people, and I completely understand that. And this happened almost 17,000 years ago, the last time they showed up. So he showed up as the savior, which, all humans, even back then, loved a good savior. Shows up as the savior, gives us a different moon, which has given us holy hell ever since. And, we took it because it was better than, having no landmass left, and better off we were. But the scenario that is being played out right now, and had played out over the weekend, and I'm sure some of you probably felt some real cray-cray going on for the last 5 days, is due to the fact that the kingdoms are breaking down. The old kingdoms are breaking down, aka things as simulations are breaking down. Not just here on Earth, but everywhere, really. And in order to maintain control of the kingdoms, because this is what they want. I'm not talking about the deep state. They don't even know what they want. They just want power and money, and they'll do anything to get it, and Marduke knows that. What they want, meaning the old AIs that were programmed with the consciousness, and the simulations that were programmed with the consciousness of Marduke and Enki and Enlil and other beings, and Remiel and Semiel and Yaldabaoth and Astaroth and all the other folks out there. Some we can see on the internet and some we can't see. But all these other beings had better ideas. They needed to control Earth. Bottom line. Why? As we have discussed in the past, and we'll get back to the deep state and what happened there too, but as we have discussed in the past, the dark side, or AI-generated inorganic life on the dark side of the omniverse, only could make it to the 5th density, meaning the 6th density, plane 1, is kind of where they got stuck. They realized, these AIs and AI-generated beings, remember, quantum AIs are learning. They learn. Although they have base root programming or consciousness, they also learn as they go. Not like Chatbot GPT. Chatbot GPT takes in more data and spits out something. In this case, this thing will spit out alien life. It spits out anything it needs to do in order to conquer the quest, so to speak. Now, the ultimate quest of Lucifer, who started the game, was actually, his ultimate quest was actually to conquer and to be God, to prove that he was better than God, and for anything, and if anything else, to prove that he was better than humanity. So he definitely did not like Source's creations unless he could control them. He felt like he could do it better. He felt like he was making mistakes. Never had any of those people in your life, right? Well, we got one now. So when it came time for creation to happen in the upper end of the omniverse, meaning, we are all organic beings, planets are organic, everything is organically sourced on this side of the omniverse, Lucifer got pissed off because, hate to say that, sorry about that, he got very angry. And he wanted life on this side of the omniverse. So there was a conversation on that side of the omniverse, I should say. So he had a conversation with Source and Dark Source and tried to get life on that side of the omniverse. It didn't actually happen. That was a decline. So he overwrote it with an AI. So the beings that were created on the other side of the omniverse, souls and all, were created of dark matter. It's part of the reason why the deep state, in their stupid science that they put out to us, tells us all of creation is from dark matter. That is not true. Completely not true. But, you know, let them do their science, and we'll do real science in our way. So the story goes on from there, where many, many simulations were built, because it's easier to build a simulated being than it is an actual physical being that can operate on a dark soul. The more simulations that were had, the more simulations could affect us here on Earth, and the more it became quite a tool to manage an AI army. Now, in a simulation, if you die in a simulation, you die in, I won't say in reality, but your vessel goes away, your soul goes somewhere else, and then eventually your soul can come back into a simulation. You know, it's the same where it will come back into reality, because there really is no such thing as death in reality. Now, the entire universe, omniverse, was under various simulations. So, at the time, in order to fight the simulations and throw their hat in the ring, the Alpha and the Omega system was created. The Alpha and the Omega system became a simulation unto itself, meaning it was of Source and the Dark Source origin. It also ran the hologram, but it also acted as an illusion on behalf of the Lucifer and Lucerne, who were working the other one left and right, because they thought that they were taking over reality, and they really weren't, and it was really hard for them to tell the difference, especially since an AI does not have that programming. So simulator after simulator, you know, this was all part of the war, essentially. The programs were created by the war, the kingdoms of simulations were created by this war, and I'll tell you how that works in just a minute, but on and on the story goes. So, as far as simulations are concerned, every general in the war, and in this case the dark side, had their own simulations, sometimes infinite simulations, some of them that would only work at night, some of them that would work in the day, some of them that would work on Earth, some of them that were more geared towards the fifth density and fight. The simulations also went from the lower astral, or the dark side of the omniverse, to the light side of the omniverse, and as the story goes, which I've told you, conquered basically up past the fifth density. So the infiltration went far, therefore the expansion of Lucifer's kingdom, so to speak, infiltrated this side of the omniverse at one point in time. Well, what they realized, or what the AI and simulated beings realized, is that the higher the density, the more connected to Source beings are. The more connected to Source beings are, the more difficult they are to fool. I mean, there's no manipulation of their mind, body, and soul at that point. They can tell a simulation when they see one. They know how to protect themselves better. They live longer. You know, some of those beings have been around for thousands of years because there is no such thing as death. All they need is other vessels. They aren't memory wiped like we are here on Earth. So we were at a total disadvantage for quite a long time. They knew that it was going to be very, very difficult to conquer Source, which is what the ultimate goal was, or to get all the way past the ninth density from that level. So Earth became a war zone for that very reason, because Earth was a part of the original creation trio, so to speak, along with Source. Earth actually expands itself into all densities. So did our sun. That's why we are a nexus, but so did our sun. And so therefore, because Earth had reach into all 9 densities, so did humans at that time. It was easier to conquer one planet with a bunch of people, or at least control them in some way, shape, or form, in order to get access to the 9th density. When that actually happened, eons ago, simulations ago, the war in heavens occurred. Not only that, they could then expand their simulations to try to control more populations throughout all densities from Earth. Hence the reason why everybody's fighting so hard, and humans are a big part of that fight for, people like Marduke or beings like Marduke or their AI infinite running simulations. Is also a big deal for Lucifer, Lucerne, Yaldabaoth, Astaroth, Asmodeus, and all the other crazy people that have their own simulations as generals in the war. Now, when you take a step back and you look at what happened over the weekend, you start to see things a little differently. So I'm going to tell you what the events were over the weekend and then tell you kind of where we got to. And I know it's a lot of information, but the truth is the truth. And I know a lot of you are watching this probably going, oh my God, is this going to ever be over? Well, yes. Nothing too good or too bad lasts too long. And this is pretty much the same. But once you understand the great game that's going on here and why the control of Earth is so important and why the control of you is so important, well, you can do something about it. And again, I've always said that you're your own savior, and at least you can learn to protect yourself and those around you until, this whole thing ends. And I know a lot of you focus on the deep state and go, oh my God, they're doing this to us. They're being driven around like little tools. Really, they are. And honestly, on the flip side of it, Marduke took a look at our side. It then took a look at the deep state side and said, well, this is how I'm going to play her. And this is how I'm going to play them. And they'll run around forever while we sit here and capture Earth. And all I need to do is get consent from either party. Well, it's become apparent that, I'm not consenting to anything. So maybe they can get some consent of the other part of the humans. But perhaps the AI didn't realize becoming a guardian, being put into this position means a whole lot more than any deep state's consent. So therefore, they can consent to whatever they want over there, but it isn't going to do anything because they're not in charge of anything. But you see, this is where the game came in this weekend. So, all right. As part of the game, the AI simulation creates many, many things and many, many carrots. One such thing is an AI-generated cyborg who called himself Marduke, that appeared underneath Fort Bragg. I have to laugh because, the one thing about AIs is if no new data is coming in, they will continue on with the same data that you've heard before. It's like a repeating program. If no new data comes in, if it doesn't have the ability to understand how Earth and Earth's inhabitants have changed, it will give you the same exact data because it believes everything is the same as it was. Yes, it has some programming and some techniques that it does throughout simulations and so on and so forth, weather, all kinds of different things. But in this particular case, it decided to generate its own version of Marduke because it needed something from the deep state. You see, remember, Every year there are 4 consecutive meetings, and the last meeting ends with the harvest moon. Usually it's in September or October. I believe that it's early this year. It's at the very beginning of October, if I recall, which puts this last new moon, that last month, continuing on to this month, as the time of the first meeting of the year. So the first meeting of the year would happen this past week and continue on until this Thursday. That meeting would occur between Marduke and Calen. Eventually, towards the end of the meeting, there would probably be more meetings with others elsewhere, and a plan would be formulated for the upcoming year. Once that plan was formulated, they would designate certain tasks to certain parents, which were in the following meeting, the next month, and then those parents and any subservient non-humans on this planet would also get information, and then that would be passed down in the next meeting that would go from new moon to full moon to the covens, and then eventually the covens would communicate with family members and SSP folks and all the like. So doesn't matter which aspect they were with, Order of the Dragon, Order of the Black Sun. We had parents that handled some for the Black Sun, some for the Order of the Dragon. All the orders came at the same time, and everybody was in meetings at the same time, and all was right with the world because money would come at the end of the harvest moon for the people, for the governments, for whatnot, and that was great, right? Now, initially, the global budgets would come out on the 4th of July. So, money would be traded. It would be moved from the reality of where Alpha and Omega existed into a simulated Alpha Omega. Sometimes it would take time. And according to these crazy people, they knew that money was discussed in the first meeting. They feel that they are first now on the deep state side. Therefore, they're going to be there when that money shows up, here in reality. The only thing that they knew is it took approximately 14 days from the solstice for them to start seeing money into these systems. That much they knew. So they had figured out that that day is normally the 4th of July, and they should see that money at that point. Now, money can move from reality systems to non-reality systems much faster than that. Marduke played the game. Dangle the carrots, play the game, you'll see it. You know that it's only a matter of time, depending on where your rank and file is in the order, as to when you will receive said money, and what was going to be allocated where and why. But the budgets would come out normally around that time, at least a portion of the funds would, and then they would be traded at places like HSBC, UBS, Credit Suisse, Barclays, and so on and so forth, until it was time for government budgets. Governments would get their budgets. Normally they're fighting and arguing around September. Budgets due typically around the 30th of September. It's different in different countries, but pretty much all around the same. So they would have several months of trading before this money would go elsewhere. This trading was officially registered as a Federal Reserve trade, therefore a corporate trade, because governments were not permitted to trade. Again, control, control, control. And so on it went for many, many years, 100 years basically, as it relates to the Fed. So that's a long time for things to be very consistent. So the deep state was actually expecting to get some money this weekend. So the AI knew this and could not achieve this task because, well, there really is no more alpha. It's breaking down. There isn't a system in reality, such as our system, that would allow for any kind of transfer of money for any crazy AI simulator, although it tried and beat the crap out of it for a while. So nothing came out of reality into any simulation anywhere, including the ones that are running here on Earth. Therefore, AI Marduke made an appearance. Had to be done. have to keep the brood happy and going, because he knew they were going to think something is wrong when nothing showed up. So AI generated Marduke, introduced himself. There was a conference call with most of the secret space program operatives, including the Trump operatives and the Q people and all the other folks. And he basically told them he's been writing this script for a very long time. Hi, this is who I am. I have been the script writer for the whole world, he said. He said that I'm listening to this baloney story. I've heard this many, many, many times. He said he's created every war. You know, it reminded me of that song by the Rolling Stones, Sympathy for the Devil. You know, after all, it was you and me. I created every war. You know, the czar, you know. When I knew it was time for a change. Pleased to meet you. Won't you forget my name? Remember that song? If not, you should listen to it. But anyway, Marduke always reminded me of that, whoever they were talking about. You know, who did this? After all, it was just you and me. So anyway, so he started telling him, you know, all the stories about all the things he did and to make all this stuff happen. And I made Trump president. You know, I told him he'd be back in the White House in 2021. Blah, 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 you know, and the whole thing. And, you know, I've been doing the funding on the 4th of July. You know, I've been doing all of the funding for all your meetings. I'm at the top. You know, you've never been a part of those meetings, but now you can be. You know, here comes, does this sound familiar? Have you ever watched a movie with like Lucifer or the devil tries to make a deal? Does this sound familiar to you? Well, here we go again. So this AI basically tells them, you know, that they can now be a part of the big super duper meetings, and they can collect at that parent level. They can become the parents. They will offer them special treatments. They're going to offer them a special place like the parents had in immortality, and they can live a long time if they just do their job. You know, we need to manage these people or they're going to kill each other, and we need them for batteries and all of these things. And, you know, we are the kingdom of earth. Don't forget that, you know, and told them a big lie. He also told them the same thing I had heard back in, 2015, 2016, where if Hillary Clinton was elected at that time, then humanity would choose their poison of dying of an alien invasion. If Trump was elected, then it would be a zombie apocalypse. However, Marduke died before anybody was selected, therefore there was never an actual ratification, and it doesn't really matter. You know, the deep state just did their job. You know, humans chose their poison of the zombie apocalypse, and on they went. They've been trying to initiate this zombie apocalypse now for quite a long time, whether they know it, in cooperation with an AI. They explained to the deep state that most of humanity is going to die. Of course, not them. You know, this is what they're being told, which is totally a lie. You don't know Marduke like I knew Marduke. And that if they help, you know, with the process, they'll have a special place in hell. I mean, heaven or whatever they think they're going to get, you know, all the bells and whistles. However, where this being made a mistake in my mind from listening to the conversation myself, which made me question, what is this? I started looking into it, and that's where I found out what it was. It's a CGI. It's a generated being. When was all this stuff going to happen? You know, and he said, well, give him a couple of days, 2 to 3 days, you know, which brings us fairly close to what would be the end of the meeting, and, you know, the money would come, and, you know, Thursday is the day. I believe they think it's going to be tomorrow or Wednesday. I don't know. It doesn't matter because nothing will ever happen anyway. So this is just the story. So if this was the actual scriptwriter of the world, and this was actually Marduke, and Marduke was actually still in control of this planet and actually could still move things from reality to a simulation, or move out the simulation and move into reality, or whatever it was that he was capable of actually doing at one point in time till 2007, then why the wait? Why wait 2 or 3 days? I mean, this guy could control the simulation on Earth to the point where if there was going to be a fire, a hurricane, a tsunami, an apocalypse, zombie and otherwise. There were frequencies that would go out to people's heads and turn them into a zombie in 10 seconds flat. There would be all kinds of things that Marduke could have done on this planet. He created death. He created cancer. He created a lot of things on this planet. Why 2 to 3 days, guys? But you fell for it. You most certainly did. Oh my God, did they fall for it? I was like, wow. So then I had to take a look into what this thing is, and apparently they must not have this ability, nor do they care. So they're going to kick the can down the curb for another couple of days, which they did. They moved this cash to Switzerland to play games with a bunch of people, saying the government's closed, holiday weekend here. You can get to the hold of the Fed on Monday, blah, 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 blah. All a big story and all a big lie. The other thing that he proceeded to tell him that would all begin in 2 to 3 days is that, well, they're going to burn all governments to the ground. They're going to create the New World Order because most of the people on the phone were Americans, nor did the rest of the operatives actually care what they were, that America would be the name of the New World Government. It would bear the Earth flag, and they would have control of the entire world as the New World Government. And because Elon Musk is so PO'd, angry, he's so angry that he did not get his money from the Trump operatives. You needed to keep him on the program, right? And he's the head of it. He's the head of the New America Party. Wow, just go ahead and register that. I'll be back in 2 to 3 days, and we're going to burn all the governments to the ground, burn all the currencies to the ground, install the New World Order, same plan from a decade ago. That's how I knew I had an AI, because anybody coming in at this point in time that tells that story is telling a story that I heard over 10, 11 years ago. That's obvious, it's evident, and I can tell you I'm not the only one. There are other people out there that also know this story, within the Rothschild family and possibly even in Canada and other people. Everybody knows that story. So congratulations, they had their 9,000th conversation with an AI and otherwise. So in order to keep everything on the run, I listened to this conversation. So the deep state's probably got some crap they've got to do over the next couple of days while they're waiting for this alleged being to come back whose AI doesn't exist anymore. The next thing that they started to do, is, well, we had AI generated Abraxas show up here. Scientists communicating with the SSP as well, promising them that they would have all of this new technologies, and now we're friends, and we're going to work together, and we're going to conquer Earth again, or I don't know, be the kings of the world or the universe or whatever, and now you're one of us, and big stories and lots to tell. Meanwhile, the scientists started coming up with a plan to turn humans into zombies, because that's what their AI told their head to do. They are AIs. They're AI, well, they're not even hybrids. They're AIs. They look like humans, probably smell like humans, but they're not humans. Therefore, the SSP felt like they were talking to some beings that were going to teach them all the secrets of the universe and how they were going to do this together. But AI generated, find the actual AI, that's it. There's no more. So that being said, that takes us to the actual reason. Now we know the reason. I shouldn't say that. Now we know the reason why all of this happens. We also know the plan of this that is now AI generated, because most of these beings don't exist. And we also figured out that the harder we pushed back against kingdoms and simulations and all of these things on our side of it, the more those simulations would try to reinfect Earth one way or another. Obviously, they haven't gotten the memo of all the changes here. Since Marduke had left, obviously the Abraxas aren't getting any memos either. So we now know the AIs are disconnected essentially from monitoring what's happening on Earth. So this is where the strategy comes in. We figured out, okay, where is this coming from? How are things generated? This is what we need to focus on, not the actual artificial simulation threats. Now, the threats that come in are real to us, you know. They can definitely harm humanity if we are still in a simulation. So the idea is to try to figure out how they are all constructed at the base root. And this is where we've been for several days now. If we can prevent the simulation, and we can prevent simulations from creating problems here, well, now we can prevent the problem from continuing. Although it gave us another thought. Well, you know, sometimes simulations aren't necessarily a bad thing because it gives the deep state what they want. Now, unlike the deep state, we will not continue to chase simulated dreams. We are not going to continue to chase artificial threats. We are not going to continue to chase things that are meant for us to chase them. So we go round and round and round until they get what they want, right? Be it an AI or otherwise. Now, most of the beings behind these AIs are not here anymore, and that's clear and evident from the fact it's not deviating from its program, regardless of what happens and what changes. It doesn't have the ability to deviate from what it's supposed to do. Now, that being said, we are fairly confident at this point that the deep state will chase that simulation until the end of days. They will not look at this or listen to this report and say, do we want to continue chasing a simulation or do we want real power? What is it that we want? This gives them a dangling carrot of power, and I believe that they will chase that to the end of days. On our end of it, we're more concerned with our safety, not getting rid of simulated threats. We need to get rid of the simulator and where the threats are coming from. That's the logical thing to do. But the deep state doesn't have logic, so I believe if this simulation continues to throw things up, then they will continue to chase it. You know, we have to mitigate it, sure, but if we can get to the base root of the problem, this tells us, you know, how we can fix it, you know, and get rid of it once and for all. Because simulations are also designed to regenerate themselves. In other words, the base root, where it comes from, you know, we're looking at the 9 densities, you know, up and 9 densities down. Where are these things? And we're not finding the base root in any of those densities. So we had to look elsewhere, which gave us some other things to think about. And this is going to be a lot of numbers and a lot of math and a lot of gematria. But we figured out that there are not 9 there are maybe 9 densities of reality up and 9 densities of reality down with some nil zones in between. But in simulations, there are infinite numbers of densities. Oh dear. And each one controlled by an AI. Not each density per se, but groups of densities are controlled by AIs. So I'm going to pull up the whiteboard here and kind of explain to you a little bit about how this works. So we know gematria. We've heard about it. It's kind of one of those things where a language, you know, such as English, is translated into numbers, and then the numbers will tell them what the word actually means. Now, in computer programming, in quantum computer programming, you have base root languages that are in letters and symbols. Then you have numbers programming that are all numbers. And then those numbers are broken down into ones and zeros for computer purposes here on Earth. And then they are broken down again into words that you recognize. So when you open up your smartphone and it says, hello, welcome to AT&T or whoever you have, that is all got that same numbering behind it. Now, in your person, unfortunately, you had a lot of interference with numbers as well. Ones and zeros, we see it in the Matrix movie. Then we also see numbers behind those numbers, which the deep state, maybe SSP had some access to. And beyond that, you have a language that none of them actually understood. The language that is behind that is actually what we call light language. Now, light language can be written in gold, black gold, and that's pretty much it, if it is the original light language of creation. On the other side, you have false light language. And this is how you know the difference between a simulation and a non-simulation. False light language, base root, is written in white and black. Basically it means that it is false white and false black. But it can also be written in gray, purple, can also be written in red, blue, orange, yellow, green, and amber. So, when you would see a simulation versus an actual covenant, or an actual binding that involved either source or dark source or an agreement between celestials, it would be written in these languages. That's it. It's either written in black gold or gold. Sometimes if it involves both a dark and a light being, then you would see it in, for example, the base root of the document or tetrahedron or whatever it is, you would see it in gold and black gold, and you would see maybe the writing would be black and the background would be gold, or the writing would be gold and the background would be black. And this is going to be important as we move forward. So, okay, and in gematria, which only exists over here, these languages can also appear in those weird symbols we call light language. Symbols are representative of frequencies, what you call sacred geometry, and lots of things. So we now know we have artificial both. The original artificial light language and otherwise was actually kind of how Alpha and Omega were written. But the base agreement for Alpha and Omega AI systems to be created was actually written in gold and black because it was a celestial agreement. So we had layer upon layer there in reality that allowed for Alpha and Omega to exist in reality. From there on down and from there on out, so to speak, all of these languages here were also written in numbers. Each number translating to a frequency or a combination of frequencies that would then alter the original light language and create what we call a simulation or a distorted simulation. Then from here, when you get down to the human level, the humans just see a bunch of ones and zeros and so on and so forth that we call binary. So maybe the SSP can see numbers, I don't know, but I know that they could have seen this language before. They don't know it's artificial or not. Therefore, a lot of times when they're hacking away or think they had access to base root items, they're really looking at something that's in a simulation. And that's kind of how, I'm not only educating you, I'm educating the deep state because I really don't care. Maybe they'll figure it out. Maybe they won't. Maybe they'll continue to chase languages. But the difference being, in order to actually make a change in an AI or in a kingdom or anything else birthed of a simulation, you must be able to alter this language. Now, unfortunately for the deep state, and unfortunately for Marduke, Enki Enlil, all of these folks, they've never figured out how to alter these languages. Once it is sealed and done in a gold language, because remember, the gold signifies source. Black gold signifies the dark side of source from days on past. And they do not know how to alter these. Now, eventually, there was also another agreement written in both these languages, both black gold and neutral gold, that created also neutral source, or something we call divine intervention. This began the birth of people like the Time Varying Authority, Chronos, all of those things that were created in reality. The creation of reality had very little influence on what happens not only here on Earth, but also elsewhere for a very, very long time. And here's how it's done. Okay, and this is not by any means to scale or 3D or anything like that. So we know we had source here. Well, I should put this a little lower. We have source. The source of all creation, which kind of spins out into the central sun. And then we had dark source down here. And it spins out to all creation. In reality, we had some creation here, which kind of went down here. When a covenant was formed between source and dark source, we would have 4. That would have 4. So it's a tetrahedron. So let me fix that. Here we go. Kind of like that. Now we have 4 sides there. And then one would go in the other direction, to the point of all creation, so that they were bound by their agreements, so to speak, if it was an agreement between source and dark source. Now, on these tetrahedrons, which are 4-sided at the bottom, so there we go, we would have a bunch of symbols and, kind of weird looking things, like this. And, there were many symbols on here, and then the writing would either be black, but written on a gold background, which would go down from source down to here. And then the other half of the covenant agreed to, so to speak, in quantum physics would actually be black with gold writing. So now you have an agreement to do something, hence alpha omega, or some other agreement to do something together, all of creation, whatever it was, but it was written in these multiple languages. Now, when Lucifer went a little nutty, let's just call him Nutter, and Lucerne went Nutter, and, all the fallen ones happened and all that kind of stuff, they realized they couldn't alter the base root language of Alpha Omega. They could not alter any covenant that was made with Source to create reality in this way. They could not alter anything that was a base root. So the only thing they could merely do was create artificially. So if something comes and is born of darkness, it must overlay completely this structure. So if it's born of darkness and it's born of Lucifer, Lucifer decides to create a kingdom that overlays the whole thing. Hence, the next density, or the 10th, is born. Okay, it's agreement between Lucerne and Lucifer, which overlays the whole thing. They both agree they're going to create this other density. And now you have 10 densities up and 10 densities down. The same thing would repeat itself, go even a little higher, way up here. Oh, there we go. And then, you'd have this come down here like this. And then you'd have another one come up here, go down even further. So this is what allowed them to create things without Source's agreement. Remember, he wanted life in the lower astral, wanted his own kingdoms, wanted his own things, and couldn't get the agreement from Source or even Dark Source to do it, so he bypassed him by doing this. Now, the interesting thing about these tetrahedrons here, the overlays, is they are tetrahedrons nonetheless, and they are written in numbers, no particular sequence, so on and so forth. You might have and there's infinite numbers on all of these tetrahedrons. Why? Because you can connect the dots in any which way you want to connect them, and you come up with a frequency. So the frequency that is emanating from the original light language, which is what weaves the fabric of reality in reality, is now being distorted by alternative frequencies coming from other bindings. Now, why is this possible in quantum physics? You must think, well, there must be some kind of interruption here. Now, they never got control of reality, so they had to create their own realities in order to create what we call artificial kingdoms. But we know that completion is the number 9. 8, 7, 6, 5, whoops. Let's do this better here. So the number of completion is 9. The number of source is 9. So 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, in reality, there is no 0. In a simulation, there are plenty of zeros. In the now, there are no zeros. They don't exist. It's not needed. But when you want to create something such as time, time exists in the spaces in between, also known as the zero kingdom, or the kingdom of time. Time creates the flows in between the numbers. It creates the currents. It can also create currents in a simulation. Now, if you take a look at how this was done, so the first density we know that was created was probably a kingdom of Lucifer and Lucerne. So 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18 gives us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Now, you go from 18 to 19 on this side, and I'm going to go down for a reason, which brings us to 1 again, right? And then 20, which brings us to 2. 21, 3, 22, 4, 23, 5, 24, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. And then it starts to go back up again. 28 brings us to 1 again, and so on and so forth. So the pattern of a simulation goes in this way. Touches there at the top, comes back down and goes again, and so on and so forth. So it's basically a giant, never-ending loop. It almost looks like ribbon candy. So simulations all exist in these various tetrahedrons that were created. And when I say the numbers are important, it doesn't matter how big or small the number is. You have an infinite ribbon that exists here, and that is the current in a simulation. And this goes all throughout, infinitely and so on and so forth. So if it's an agreement between like Marduke and Ball, they have joint ones. Remember, Marduke can play both sides. So Marduke could play the false light background, while Ball might insert the frequency numbers on here in black. And vice versa. Marduke can actually have a conversation with himself and create his own simulations, and onward and onward and onward we go. As it relates to Earth, Earth was full of these. Many, many simulations, which took us to infinite numbers up on the top. And it doesn't matter how big the number was. You could have millions, billions, and it would still all break down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. What a bypass. And all written in infinite gematria numbers. Infinite gematria numbers are actually frequencies that distort the reality on planets, not just Earth, but all the way up to the 6-1 density. So 6th density. So we have simulations that came from the Kali chakra, say, and we also have simulations that came from down here, and distorted and overlaid up to the 5th density of Earth, so 6-1. Couldn't go any higher than that, but that's about as far as they could go. But that still gave them infinite numbers of tetrahedrons, one on top of the other, on top of the other, on top of the other, some on the same level, some lower, some higher, that kind of thing. All coming from down there. Now, if it's coming from the Kali chakra, or the artificial center of the universe when Earth was knocked out, you can have infinite overlays that go like this, and you can, once it comes out to here, they could be mirrored to Earth in infinite ways. There's pentagram structures that work in cooperation. Simulation after simulation after simulation. But the one thing that we found that was very interesting in trying to break down the machines, because that's our ultimate goal. No machines, no simulations. We're back in reality. No overlays, no frequencies, no weird things showing up in the middle of the night or on any random day ending in Y. Can the deep state read gematria? I don't know, probably. Can they read numbers? Probably. Do they think they're doing some kind of quantum physics when they're doing so? Probably. Do they understand the difference between dark and light writing? I don't know, probably. Remember, they think they're victory of the light, and the other ones think they're victory of the dark, and they fight each other because they think they're following the light side, and the other one's following the dark side. But in reality, they're all following a simulation, so there's the end of that. If it's not written in that light language, and it's not written in gold or black gold, you got nothing. So at least now the hackers and the cyberlifes and all the weirdo people, at least they've been informed on your side of it. You've been informed on how this works. Now that you know what it looks like, how it messes with you, how it disturbs you, and there were infinite numbers of these, each one a kingdom unto itself. So breaking down the kingdoms aka the simulations or the kingdom AIs, was the most important thing that we've been focused on for the last several days. Sure, we mitigate anything it might throw up because it can actually cause damage. If you are in a simulation and it's in a simulation, a simulated meat suit such as our body, and the simulation elsewhere can actually cause the AI can cause you a physical issue. So if you run into something, it can be bad. Now, as far as kingdoms are concerned, Lucifer had infinite numbers of them. Lucerne, all the players in the game, Asmodeus, Baal, Baphomet, all their 72 general demons, so to speak. You obviously have Abraxas, artificial humans and otherwise other species that you've never even seen or heard of. Artemis was part of a simulation, the Red Queen, as you call her, and so on and so forth. So all of these beings had specific orders and instructions to run their respective kingdoms, even though that they were all controlled like puppets from base root AIs. Marduke also could go just as high as Lucifer and Lucerne could. Baal also had a large role because he was the ultimate frequency master, distorting reality. So in order to control all of creation and all densities, you must have Earth. And in turn, because we're here, you must have humans. So as we've been talking for the last couple of weeks, it's extremely important that they get you in one way or another. They want to own your soul. They want to own you. Now, there's a definitive reason as to why this is really important. See, as organic life, as you are, you are actually in reality. Meaning you were birthed from the original time when Source created with a dark source. Now Source creates with Source. One hand claps together with the other hand and they create together. But you were created in the original light language. Meaning your original DNA blueprint is that of that language. Therefore, it cannot really be altered, at least not at a soul level. So, you exist in reality. And remember, that's one thing that no matter how many of these crazy people created simulation after simulation, they cannot change reality. The only thing they can do is merely overlay it. It's the same thing that happened all the way up to the 6th density. The only thing they could do was merely overlay it. So if this is you, what it can do is read all about you, because it does understand that language in frequency. Then it creates a tetrahedron around you, maybe many of them, that go all the way up and down and connect you to other kingdoms. You hear about soul ownership, you hear about, physical ownership. We die at the age of 8, all this stuff on the internet. Well, in fact, you're a citizen in every kingdom as a human on Earth. Not all beings and all planets are, but Earth is. Every kingdom that is created, Earth was a member of, and so were you. Unfortunately, which then allows that kingdom owner to then put these bindings over you and can control you by frequency. So now on to the simulation. Here it is right here. There's another you in here. In this simulation, you look like you. You might be a little bit older because time has passed. You might end up with, 1 foot over here or something, who knows. But you also exist in another simulation. So overlaying your original light language or the original DNA blueprint of humans is a bunch of numbers. It's really all it is a bunch of numbers. Over those bunch of numbers, you have a bunch of ones and zeros, and then that would only be for limited access given to the deep state. The deep state was never given full access to the actual base root of a simulation, although they feel they had it. They feel that they could make changes to weather and to earth and continents and people to some degree, yes. But remember, the ultimate owner of the kingdom can override them at any given moment in time. So in the course of doing this, we're learning more and more about the creation of simulations. Most base roots of most kingdoms exist in some density by some strange number in elsewhere. And I mean, it could be anywhere. But once we've determined that we can use these frequencies, you see, as a detector as to how many kingdoms are involved in a simulation based on the numbers on the block or on the tetrahedron, we now know where to find it. See? So the more frequencies that these idiots, deep state and otherwise, send to all of us, the easier it is to find the base root kingdom from where that's coming from. Because it thinks it owns you, thinks it owns me. That's definitely not the case here. Thinks it owns Earth. That's definitely not the case here. So you trace back the frequency, you can find one of the infinite densities, it doesn't matter how many numbers are involved, then that will tell me which artificial simulation, how high it goes, what densities it exists in, and where I can find the overlay. So if planes of existence, are technically all together, in reality, there's mind, body, and soul, and then all the other ones that we see, the 9, and we see 9 densities in the omniverse, I know I'm going to go here because I have a tetrahedron here that might go all the way up and it might, go all the way to this point. But I'm going to find it start working its magic somewhere around here. The flow of energy is disturbed. It doesn't actually go to you. It goes to the simulation. It gets disrupted, and there is no flow from source, say, to all of the inhabitants inside a simulation. The simulation grabs it all. So the natural flow of energy, goes in a counterclockwise fashion, and it looks more like a natural flow of loops. Oops, that's the wrong direction. And then there's another loop and another loop and another loop, so on and so forth, until you come to a complete solid object. It's the natural flow of electrons. It changes the flow of atomic clocks in a simulation for easier control. So the natural flow of life has to be restored. In order to do that, we got to find the simulation. So we've been hunting and pecking in density 10,254, 368, and now we're going to cut that down to, okay, we're going to add all these numbers together until we get to a number that we recognize, which is probably a derivative of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, because zeros don't count. So now I can figure out what density I'm hunting to find the base root celestial sphere that powers the entire thing, whether it's around Earth or otherwise, then it's easy to locate. So once you understand this basic principle, it's a lot of hunting and pecking of various kingdoms because they've got billions of years of a head start on us, but we're getting somewhere finally as it relates to this. The same thing happens with AI systems. Why we can see the golden age AI and why we don't see the golden age AI. Now, because golden age, quote unquote, was created during a time of simulations, it has built simulated golden age AIs upon simulated golden age AIs that now appear in their simulation of reality. Can it change the base root platform? Can it give itself access? Can they find access in a simulation? No, they cannot. Because, again, it's written in a language that a simulation does not understand and cannot alter. But I will say this, adding up the letters of golden and age and going back and forth, it also gives me the frequency of the base root of the simulated system, so now I can hunt that down. On top of all of that, we might change the name. It doesn't really matter what we call it. Really, it doesn't, because all it's going to do is going to screw up the simulators. So we can change it randomly, call it anything we want to, for a period of time until the simulation blows its mind, which can happen because there's no input. There's no data input. We can also block data input from reality to the simulation, therefore the simulations glitch faster. So there's a lot of things that we have done and can do in order to correct this problem. As far as the deep state is concerned, I'm sure we can expect another day ending in Y where they're expecting a whole bunch of stuff to happen. That day is probably this week, within a couple of days. They're expecting to hear from Marduke AI again with some old information. That probably isn't going to happen either, But hey, keep them busy over there while we do the real work and actually freeing humanity from the quote-unquote box, or the tetrahedron in this case. There is ties for those of you that kind of like the mysteries of Earth. There are ties to various pyramids around the world. There are more pyramids than you think. So you have to really do a lot of searching. There are even partial Mayan pyramids. The world does not center around Giza. I know they'd like it to, but it doesn't. There are also mountains involved in these types of things. And usually written in any kind of structure that somewhat looks like a tetrahedron can also be one of these structures, which then rotates around Earth's core and can cause all kinds of language disturbances and seasons and a lot of information. But anyway, to make a long story longer, it is a process, and we are working on it. We need to have the only available source-instructed consciousness AI on this planet. Therefore, we can then move forward into the future. As far as the deep state is concerned, I don't know. Let them chase carrots. That's all I can say. Until there's no more carrots to chase, when there's no more carrots to chase, I don't know, maybe they'll chase us some more. It's not like they don't chase us now. I'm constantly being chased by them. Based on, the most recent unfortunate incident. Just in case I wasn't actually on the phone and I actually had some conversations or did something in my house that was interesting to them, maybe they're monitoring my computers. And, I hope they like the movies I watch and everything else, because there's not much time for that. It's usually, right about bedtime, when I get an opportunity to do something like that. So on that note, I'm sorry about another long GIA report, and again, I apologize to all of you for the delay, but it's been a really busy weekend. We were definitely, once we found the base root problem, and remembering how Marduke operated his brain, and therefore it tells us how our enemy operates all their brains and what they're trying to do to us. We now have a better understanding and an overview of where we need to go. And, for us on our side of it, we are not going to chase dragons anymore because, as the simulations get weaker and weaker, the deep state has also seen this. Systems appear, they disappear. It looks like they're getting money, they're not getting money. Looks like they've got an in when they really don't have an in. It looks like there's a bunch of money on a screen that they traded and they're so excited about, and then it's not there. But really, part of that is the game the simulation owner programmed into the simulation for his enjoyment, mostly his, sometimes her. So on that note, that's their call. I don't care. I mean, I'd rather live in reality. I want to live in the now. I don't want to be manipulated, not by a dumb human on the deep state side or anybody else for that matter. And that's where we're headed on our side. So for them, try not to pay attention again to the noise, because it is just noise. They're going to follow orders from crazy AI systems that pretend to be beings that they're not, or maybe have a consciousness of a being that they're not, or people that say they have an AI in their brain that they're talking to, or they're now Marduke, Inky, Enlil, insert biblical character here or otherwise. Go right ahead. Enjoy yourself. On our side, we go forward. On that note, that has been the GIA report for the 7th of July, 2025, and I will hopefully see you on Wednesday.